Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. All right.
We settled in? All right, folks. I think everybody that's going to be present with us is. I've got 9:34. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the South Carolina Retirement System Investment Commission on April the 20th, 2023. And before we get started, I'm going to ask the CEOs, are there housekeeping issues? Are we going to shuffle things around on the agenda? Any possible changes or curveballs we might have?
Not yet.
Not yet?
No, sir. I mean, I'm not promising that there won't be, but, not at this point.
None foreseen at this point. Okay, then, everyone, I would like to call for a motion to adopt the agenda that's been put before us today.
So moved.
I have a motion. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the agenda put before us today? Hearing none, all in favor of adopting this agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed saying no.
Aye.
All right, we have an agenda. All right, next up, folks, I hope you had a chance to read the minutes of the meeting from the March 2nd, 2023 meeting. I'd like to call for a motion to adopt those, or excuse me, approve those, please.
So moved.
I have a motion. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Is there any discussion on the minutes provided for the March 2nd, 2023 meeting? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes for the March 2nd, 2023 meeting, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The minutes are official. For the chairman's report, I have no motions, nor do I have any information to share. Committee reports, one being enterprise risk and audit. I don't think we had a meeting, did we, from those members? No. And from the Human Resources and Compensation Committee, I don't recall a meeting of that committee since our last meeting either, so there's no information for that. Item number 4 on the agenda is the CEO's report, and I'm going to recognize Mr. Mike Hitchcock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think as everyone's aware, this meeting, pretty much exists on our calendar to give the commission the opportunity to fulfill its statutory obligation to approve the annual investment plan, and to either, affirm or amend the statement of investment objectives and policies. So I want to run through and, I won't spend a lot of time. The summary, these are the summary of the proposed amendments. I went through everyone with you at our last meeting. And so, and since, and what I ask is that, if commissioners had any feedback after the last meeting, in addition to these changes, to get with me. There are a number of other additional edits that were made to that are proposed to be made to the document in the interim since our last meeting. I'm going to run through those with you rather quickly, but certainly answer any questions that you may have. One, there on page 7 of, and I'm using the black line document here on page 7, I clarified that the base case scenario that you see in table 1, table 1 is the projection of when we get the fully funded. That the base case scenario is a separate analysis in the actuarial valuation. There was a little bit of confusion about those two. So I ensured that there was a separation between those. And to show that is not necessarily the same, because when the base case scenario when we get to fully funded is different from the actuarial, the amortization schedule or the amortization period in the latest actuarial evaluation. So I wanted to make sure that those were separate. There's also there is a suggestion, and this didn't make it into the version that was posted, but I would recommend that we make this change. On page 8, there's a suggestion there, and this is in the part dealing with the projections on contributions and when those contributions would look to begin to decline. And also this is where table 2 is, that shows that. And in the paragraph below that, it talks about that there's some probability the contributions, based on the latest capital market expectations, there's some probability the contributions may have to increase. I would suggest that we just change that to some risk, because that's really what we're concerned with, rather than necessarily probability. We're concerned with the risk that contributions may go up. On page 8, clarified in belief 1, that it says that, in that belief, it says that the commission believes that asset allocation is the primary driver of risk, return, and cost. Just made sure that it was clear that when we're talking about asset allocation, we're talking about the policy allocation, since that is something that is a defined term later on in the document. Next, on page 11, added some language clarifying the chair's lead role in ensuring the effectiveness of the relationship with the general investment consultant, and also further clarified my role in that regard. Page 13, added some language clarifying the linkage of the reference portfolio's risk and the policy portfolio's risk. On page 17, there's a date change, or there's a clarified a date. So the date is that indicating that we were using the capital market expectations, I believe, from 2019. And then on page 22, added some language specifying that the effects of diversification and portfolio structure, even though we expect to see those over longer periods of time, either 3 to 5 years, that we're still measuring those over shorter periods of time. So those are the changes since the last time that we reviewed this document at the March meeting. Certainly be happy to answer any questions or open it up for discussion, Mr. Chairman.
I'll open up the floor to any discussion or questions to Mr. Hitchcock involving the SIOP.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Condon, you're recognized, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I don't really have a question, but, because I've discussed it with Mike some, but I am really concerned with Section 13 proxy voting. And I could go into a detailed analysis of why I'm concerned with it, but you know, I think our statutes, very simply, our statutes and our and words that already kind of mimic our statutes are already in this document without Section 13. And I think Section 13 is full of ambiguity, confusion, and I know we're trying to copy a bill that's not yet passed the legislature, but it will maybe pass, but we just don't need it, and it will lead to confusion. And we have to review. It says we have to review this compliance with this section annually. And how do we review something that's ambiguous and confusing? So I suggest, and I can, depending on how the chair would like to handle it, you know, I would suggest, I strongly recommend that we delete Section 13 proxy voting from this document.
Well, okay, so I gather from your comments that maybe in your opinion, there is a place for this, but let's wait until there's statute in place first and then adopt policy to reflect that? Is this a cart in front of the horse thing?
That's part of it. I mean, I would like to see final legislation.
Right.
Before, you know, so I think that's the practical view. Mm-hmm. Let's wait to adopt anything else. So we've already put in language that deals with what's in our statutes. Okay. That say we have to follow fiduciary duty. And there's one provision in our statutes that say we have to follow proxy, you know, for proxy votes, we have to follow fiduciary duty. And that would maximize the value of the fund, all the things we like. Right. I mean, all that's already in the statute, so we're not missing anything if we take this out. right now and address it again later.
Well, that was gonna be my question. If this whole section was just eliminated right now, would that weaken us or expose us?
I think inclusion exposes us.
Okay. Chief Legal, have you had a chance to stew on this?
No, I was not aware of that concern.
Okay.
I did want to clarify, are you suggesting we delete the revisions but leave the original section 13 with the original verbiage regarding proxy voting?
No, I don't see any, well, I really haven't looked at it from that point of view.
Because we had a section in there, the original
Yeah, the original has it,
language
yeah.
is what is shown deleted at the bottom. That just,
Managers of separate accounts, that stuff that's deleted.
yes, that references essentially.
See, and that, those first four words identifies the confusion. Separate accounts, we have the right to vote, probably. When we own BlackRock or we own a private equity fund, we don't have the right to vote.
Right.
So yeah, that language already in those first four words is better than everything above it that we're proposing to add.
All right.
So I wouldn't object to that at this time, no.
So I'm trying to.
Keeping that.
Can I ask a question? So if there winds up being ambiguity in the statutes, then what do we do?
Then as a regulatory body, I guess I can call us a regulatory body in this sense, that we need to make a determination how we're gonna interpret it, and that interpretation of how we're gonna apply it should be in our policy.
Okay. I mean, yeah, because there's always the, whatever the General Assembly does, you know, with all due respect to the General Assembly, I mean, whatever they do, there's gonna be a degree of ambiguity, because they're not gonna be so prescriptive as to give us like 100% clarity on exactly what they expect us to do. You know, for me, including this really is just was more or less a placeholder. You know, understanding that this is, you know, was kind of the version of this that was moving. I can tell you, I believe that the General Assembly is going to do something along these lines in regards to proxy voting, because that seems to be the area where there is the most concern in the General Assembly is over proxies. This language is a little bit different than the language that, for instance, is in Senator Sean Bennett's bill S-583 that's currently in Senate Finance. The bill that this language is from, H-3690, is also in Senate Finance now as well. I mean, there's going to be language along this line, I would imagine, that comes out of this. But I mean, we can certainly wait to see what it is as to when we, you know, whenever we get there. But I mean, they're going to. I feel strongly that the General Assembly is going to deal with proxy voting as part of a legislative package in regards to ESG.
Mike, do you believe that's gonna happen in this session?
I don't
Or is there
know.
a risk
I mean,
that they don't?
That's not something that I can necessarily handicap as to whether or not that, because they have the Senate bill is in subcommittee, has not passed the Senate. So it has not made the crossover deadline. The House bill that did pass the House, the Senate can take that up if it wants to, and then pass that, amend it. It can either pass it as is, amend it, or not pass it at all, basically, or not deal with it. So, and if they amend it, then it goes back to the House, and then the House has another crack at it. So.
Can I ask Mr. Condon, if there isn't a legislative clarity before the end of this session, do you think you'd still rather have the legacy language? I mean, I think it's one thing if we think there's a solution coming, then we can tailor it to that. But if we're a year plus away from a solution, do you still think you have a preference for the legacy language?
Well, I think the solution exists today.
Yeah.
That's in our statutes. So,
Got it.
so no, this proposed language, again, regardless of whether we adopt it today or a year from now or 5 years from now, is confusing, ambiguous, and leads to us being exposed. So, no, I'm not in favor of this proposed language at all. But if the General Assembly passes this language, then I think we go back not to regurgitate their language. So why should we regurgitate their language? But again, like I said before, how are we now going to implement this? You know, what, you know, maybe General Assembly's not provided certain definitions, I think. You know, maybe we should provide some definitions. How are we going to go through a review process? What are we going to review annually when it says review? When it says directly or securities are owned directly or indirectly, well, indirectly, we don't own the voting right. I mean, how are we going to, what is indirect of? What is direct? You know, there are so many questions on that, which is why I think this is bad legislative language that I don't think we should
So my question,
encourage by adopting.
my question, Bill, is you want to go back to the legacy language and not have any changes at this point?
I'd have to read this, but I mean, like I said, the first 4 words, managers of separate accounts are authorized and directed to vote all proxies. That's much better language. That's talking about real proxy voting.
Right.
Proxy votes are when a shareholder gives somebody else the right to vote on the shareholder's behalf.
Right.
That's not what this whole BlackRock thing's about. We don't own the right to vote. And they're not giving us their proxy to vote on their behalf. They're by contractually giving us a right to vote on our behalf. That's not really even proxy voting.
It's directing the voting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's directing,
Directing
it's
our
directing how our pro rata share,
pro rata
that we
share.
own them directly.
But it's not proxy voting, and that's where I talk about why I say definitions are lacking. This says, you know, that's not real proxy voting. That's a contractual right being given to vote on our behalf, not on the shareholder's behalf. So,
It's essentially a pass-through.
Right.
pass-through, yeah.
Of a proxy.
But certainly not proxy, and when people,
Well, the proxy itself is
An ADR.
basically a,
Right.
I mean, the proxy itself is in essence you're voting, when you're voting by proxy, right? You're not actually voting, you're voting by you're not showing up at the shareholder meeting, you're voting by proxies, right? So you're actually filling out the proxy form instead
Well,
of showing up at the shareholder meeting and voting.
there's a couple of different levels of proxy. That's more procedural proxy. A real proxy vote, I firmly believe, and I've got definitions here in my file, you know, is a shareholder giving another person the right to vote on the shareholder's behalf.
I mean, I like I said, I'd envision this as a placeholder. You know, I mean, to the extent that we either like, however we feel about the language, all but 5 members of the House of Representatives thought that it was good. So, you know, that is in some way instructive, I think, for us. But it doesn't mean that this is going to be the final version of it, and we ultimately have to conform to whatever the final version is. So, I mean, I have no issues.
Can I just point out that, so as the prior language was written relating only to separate accounts, that would limit what it is addressing to, Ryan,
Very small.
$1.3 billion of the portfolio, whereas the expansive language, I just want everyone to understand the difference between having the language be specifically for separate accounts versus more broadly for the, you know, what we're talking about is like the pass-through of the proxy voting. In our overall public equity book, and I'm using older data here, is call it 16, 17 billion dollars. So I guess there's the scope of, you know, and I don't have a strong opinion on which is a better path, but the revised language would be for the entire 16, 17 billion dollars versus the old language really only applies more narrowly to the, 1.2 billion. So there's that aspect just for the commission's consideration as well.
Ollie?
As I recall from our March meeting, we have actually exercised that. As of that point, I think Jeff said five times. And one time there was a governance issue, if I recall it correctly. And so we wouldn't, it seems to me we would not have the authority to do that if we didn't have this language that applies to our public equity. And I think that's a pretty big hole in terms of the size of our portfolio. So if the language is something that Michael has run by the appropriate legislative people and it seems to satisfy them, I think from a strategic standpoint, it would be better to keep the language in.
Well, what I'm hearing is Mr. Condon is expressing his concerns about how this might, this is ambiguous and it could expose us. Our CEO has said that this language inserted here is done so just as sort of a placeholder until we have some hard facts. And then Holly, I'm hearing, is leaning towards adoption of what's been presented. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what do we want to do, folks?
Can I also point
Please.
out that this won't take effect until July 1st. If there is legislative clarity between here and the next meeting, we could work to perfect this.
Our next meeting is in June?
June 1st.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, when it comes right down to it, we're going to have to do whatever the General Assembly tells us to.
Right.
Right.
That's all we need to say.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, like that's I mean, at the end of the day, and I can tell you, I have been spending a tremendous amount of my time dealing with this issue with the General Assembly. And proxy voting is the thing that seems to be of the most concern. Much less so on the side of, like when the investment managers that we're investing with. This seems to be the issue that they are the most concerned with. My thought in including this was, as Holly said, was to a certain extent was to show that we are attentive to their concerns. And that may or may not at some point be beneficial to us as further legislation moves through the process.
Yep.
To show that we have, because it may be, it comes to a point where we can say that you don't have to take action because we already have. Is this probably the absolute best language? That may or not be the case. But, the legislative process is complicated. The negotiation process is involved and is multilateral at any one given time, where you're trying to satisfy a number of different interests. So, again, I don't have, I always really just, as I said, envision this as a placeholder. And that, to the extent that it's as the legislation changes, it's going to, this language would have to change.
Yeah.
But there is I can tell you, if they pass something, it's going to look something like this.
Okay. Let me throw this out there as a suggestion and kind of get the temperature for the folks involved here. By the time our next meeting happens, the deadline will not have passed for us to have finalized this for the year, correct?
Oh, no, we have to do
The
it.
deadline is
Is
end of
May
this
1st.
month.
Deadline's like,
All right, what's the penalties for missing the deadline?
oh, there's no, oh, here, wait, President, we can take for, in the version that we adopt today,
We can amend it.
we can take this
Yeah,
out.
we can always amend.
Yeah, or we can either leave it in and we can amend it, or we can take it out and deal with it later.
Well-
I mean, because the SIOP can be updated anytime you want.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, yeah.
so,
It
another,
just has to be done by May 1st.
another question, and I'm trying to get to some consensus here. Will we have more clarity in our June meeting about this?
Oh, we'll have more clarity as to whether or not anything's gonna pass, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Session's over.
And will we have more clarity on maybe what this should look like, according to what they're cooking?
I would say, yes.
So what I'm boiling this down to is what action, if any, do we need to take today, and what would it hurt by waiting until our next meeting when we will have more information than we do now?
Well, I mean, like, we don't have to take any action, but the other thing that I would say is, I've also included this, which is also from the legislative language. So, I mean, do we need to not deal with that too? I mean, because
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, is that you, Reynolds?
yes, it is.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
My only comment is, I think what I want to do is minimize either the incentive or the inclination or the propensity of the legislature to mess with us.
Well said.
And it seems to me that doing something now that they're inclined to like is more inclined to have them leave us alone, not only in this, but in other matters. And if we can live with this and they like it, I'd say let's put it in there. And then we have the ultimate power to take it out at will, whenever it's properly agendaed and voted on, et cetera.
Okay. Well, back to you, Mr. Condon, you raising this point. How would you feel sitting by adopting this now with the understanding that we're gonna revisit this next meeting and then potentially perpetually?
I will not vote for this document if it's in it. No, sir.
Okay.
Probably not now or later.
Well, we're waiting on language from across the street, so sooner or later, we're gonna have to adopt whatever those guys give us.
Well, again, I'd suggest, let's just don't, and respectfully, I say
I
this
understand.
to you and Mike and Holly, and Reynolds and everybody else. When we do adopt, because I agree with Mike, I think the General Assembly, that train's moving. They're gonna do something.
Yeah, do something.
Whether it's this session or next session, they're gonna do something. That when we think about adding something, we just don't regurgitate the statute. We think about how we're gonna implement that statute, because chances are there are gonna be questions we need to answer ourselves and how we're gonna do it.
Good point.
So, I mean, it's, let's,
Yeah.
I think, so even June, depending on when if something passes this year, will we have enough window to kind of think about implementation as opposed to just regurgitation?
I understand. What about if we were to adopt paragraph 1? Which is probably, that stands out to me as we're planting a flag, that paragraph. Does that everybody feel the same about that?
That's pretty generic, and I think that's consistent with our statutes, what our statutes tell us to do already.
All right, so.
So I'm okay with that.
We're consistent.
With 5A1, yeah?
So everybody's in agreement with everything except 13 here. Just to get a feel for the room, is everybody good with paragraph 1, the changes?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
just to get a feel for that. All right, well, I'm trying to come up with the verbiage for a motion,
Well, we can
unless
just say,
we want to continue to discuss this.
I mean, in the motion, we can just say as amended during the meeting. So we're good for that. I get that.
But then you have to have a motion for an amendment if you want to strike that paragraph that
Yeah, I mean,
Bill
if you want to
just.
do that, you can just say, you can make you can move to amend, move to amend the proposed SIOP by, striking, on page 29, by striking paragraphs, under proxy, under section 13, or item 13 on page 29, by striking items 2, 3, and 4, and leaving, item 1, and that can just be your motion, and when we go to move, to say, because we also have one other thing, we'll just say as amended in the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would delete 1 as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, just put in the scratched out language, the previous language.
Mr. Brubaker.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Condon. The reason I prefer personally, I think paragraph 1 here, I think is for policy language is more general and appropriate, and especially if you're going to go to voter choice, and with these pass-throughs that we talked about, I think if you look at the language that was struck out, I don't know if that would apply with the pass-through voting that we talked about. So I feel like I think a good compromise would be to keep paragraph 1 here, delete the remainder, and keep the original language out as well.
It is true that 2, 3, and 4 are in fact just directives from the legislature to us.
Right.
So I don't think we have to direct ourselves to do those things.
Yeah. Right.
I think as a new commissioner,
We can do them if we want.
it's helpful to have that language in the document.
Well, and there's other parts in where we do regurgitate.
Duplicate
Yeah, when you duplicate the statutory
language.
language,
Yeah,
just to
again,
ensure that it's the things that are the kind of particular importance.
Yeah.
But I'm fine with what Mark said.
I agree that 2, 3, and 4 are the most harmful to us. Absolutely. So I'd be okay with keeping 1, and I guess that then kind of the scratched out language, the old language, would kind of be would be covered by 1.
Right.
That separate account that we have would be covered by 1.
I think I'm hearing a consensus, and I guess, is that what I'm getting?
No,
Yes, sir.
I don't know. I'd like to hear from the people on Zoom, but no, I don't agree.
You do not.
I do not.
Well, Reynolds and Ed, what are your thoughts
I do.
on where we are?
Who's online?
Reynolds.
I'm not like 2, 3, and 4, unless that would, as I say, unless for some reason that would be a magic wand that would solve any problems we have with the legislature.
Ed, Missy, y'all have any thoughts on this?
I'm not opposed to adopting only 1 and not adopting 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
This is
Yeah,
Missy. Sorry.
I'd go along with that.
All right, that's Ed. Missy, your turn.
Yes, I think if the end game is to amend our language after we have greater insight regarding the General Assembly's actions, then whatever we adopt today is likely to be changed either to add or subtract or to modify. And, I think that I don't perceive that there's going to be great consequence one way or the other between now and June, but, sometimes things happen and you don't know. So I don't have extremely strong feelings one way or the other. I could go along with either approach. I think I will have a much more definitive position on this once we see what the General Assembly is going to do. You know, but I think in addition to what Mike has already said, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we got to do what they tell us to do, but we already have some statutes in place that I think give some broad direction as to what our charge is, and we need to stay true to that. You know, which is to always take actions that maximize the value of the plan for the benefit of the beneficiaries or the state retirees. And I mean, I know the devil's in the details, so that's I guess, a long response to say I can go either way today, but I will probably have much stronger feelings about this once we have more clarity from across the street.
Okay?
I still feel that this is, as it is, might be useful input to across the street. And that's the reason
Yeah, that's the
I,
intention, so.
and that's the reason I would not support an amendment. But we don't have to have unanimity, we only have to have a majority.
Mr.
Mr.
Brubeck?
Chair, that's a very important consideration. There are a number of your peers across the country that are being required to bring proxy voting in-house, full proxy voting process and do it internally, which I don't think is productive. So if this language can help prevent that, I think that would be a big plus.
So the question in my mind now is, does 2, 3, and 4 help us or hurt us? Given a global perspective.
I think it has the potential to help us.
Yeah, well, and again, that's the intent is to recognize, to demonstrate that we recognize that this is a concern that, that the General Assembly has in regards to proxy voting. The way that I read this language is it would allow us to basically to implement this, doing what we're already doing with the BlackRock, and if State Street offers the same.
They have.
Yeah.
We've already got it.
Yeah, well, and, state, then, it gives us the ability to, by directing our proxies, I think we would be in compliance. I mean, the thing is that the commission would just have to review a report, once a year on the proxy votes. You don't have to take any action on it. So,
On further thought, I can see a legislator reading what we just did, if they do read things, and say, well, this does nothing more than restate current policy. If we were to adopt only paragraph 1, but this does nothing more than restate current policy. Those people are not going to do a darn thing unless we take some action. So I do think it's probably better to have 2, 3, and 4 in there.
well, and I certainly acknowledge that we'll have to, regardless of what regardless of what they do, we'll need to put some more meat on the bone, either internally or in this document that says how we're going to actually implement it, right? That's the, this isn't prescriptive in how we would actually implement. This is just ultimately what the policy was. But this is more the policy, and we have to determine how it's implemented. But again, it's this is as much a show of, quite frankly, a much of show of good faith as anything else in dealing with the legislation across the street. So,
And in a strategic plan, that's a good strategy.
it's meant to be strategic, but.
Mr. Condon, does the discussion of potentially appeasing some of the members of the General Assembly sway your opinion on your affinity or lack thereof of items 2, 3, and 4?
I think the goal is good, but the language is bad, so no, I can't vote for the language.
Okay. Well, at some point, I'm gonna have to call for a motion on this at some point. And so, before I try to before I try to craft a motion, is there any other discussion or questions that you folks want to have in this? All right, the first motion I'm gonna call for is to add what I call paragraph 1. And then to include in section 13, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I so moved.
I mean, I'm thinking out loud right now. I want to make sure that that the motion I'm calling for is inclusive of what, they were all looking at the same amount of
Mr.
information.
Chairman, I move that we adopt, paragraph or section 13 as written and presented, by staff.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt, section 13 as written. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of adopting paragraph 13 as written, please say aye.
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 How many ayes do I have? Is that 3 or 4?
Can we maybe call the roll?
Let's do a roll call on that. How many ayes do I have for adopting 13 as written? Missy?
Missy, aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Reynolds?
Aye.
Holly?
Aye.
Participants are waiting
Jen.
in the lobby. To admit all participants in the lobby, press *2 1.
Ken, are you with us?
I'm with you.
Do you vote aye on this?
I do.
Okay. All opposed of adopting it as written, please say no.
No.
And I vote no on adopting it as written as well. But it carries. So, Mr. CEO, can you summarize this for us for the record?
This or the whole document?
What we just voted on. For the
Oh.
record.
You voted to include the language as proposed.
Okay.
That is what carried, so.
All
And
right.
approve the whole document.
Well,
Did
No,
that
we
include
didn't.
the
That's
whole
the next
document?
one.
that was
That's
just
next.
paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not that.
We were just section 13.
Just
Just section 13.
Okay.
Motion.
Yeah, but that was
Everything but
just section 13.
Right, just section 13. But I can do a
I
motion
get
for
to
the whole.
vote no again.
Yeah, I can do a motion for the whole document though. Just- That works.
Yes, let's do,
Unless there's any further discussion.
no, let's do that. Let's do the motion for the whole document.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion is the commission adopts the recommendation of the CEO and CIO to approve the proposed revisions of the consolidated annual investment plan, the statement of investment objectives for fiscal year 2023-24, as set forth in the red number document pages, 65 to 118, with an effective date of July 1st, 2023. 2, certifies that RSIC is in compliance with the Sudan divestment policy. Oh, let me pause on that one, because we did not discuss that. Last year, we decided, when it comes to the Sudan divestment policy, that the commission would just affirm that it is in compliance with that policy because we index, and that what makes us in compliance with that policy. So as long as we continue to implement public equity that way, the commission would just affirm whenever we adopt the SIOP, that we're in compliance with the Sudan divestment policy, because there's a exception for index investing. So, and we continue to index. 2, certifies that RSIC is in compliance with the Sudan divestment policy without taking additional action due to the method of implementation utilized in the portfolio. 3, authorizes staff to finalize AIP SIOP by making any technical revisions or formatting edits consistent with the action taken by the commission. And 4, to make any technical revisions necessary to conform any final legislative action of the General Assembly, which would be technical, not substantive. Any substantive would have to be brought before the commission.
All right, we're gonna do this by roll call again. Missy?
We have a motion.
I'm sorry, that was the motion. I'm sorry, getting ahead of ourselves. That was a call for a motion.
Yeah. I so moved.
Holly makes a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Missy,
We
I
have-
think Missy.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All right, let's do a roll call vote. Missy, favor or no?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Ken?
I'm in favor.
Ed? I'm sorry, yes, Ed.
Oh, Reynolds?
Reynolds, I'm sorry, Reynolds.
Aye.
Holly?
Aye.
Mr. Condon?
No.
And I know as well for the same reasons as before. Motion carries.
Okay.
All right, now we've got that out of the way. Moving on down the agenda, I'm going to recognize at this time Mr. Jeff Berg, and he's going to give us the delegated investment report.
Mr. Chairman, this is just simply alerting everyone that the delegated investment report, I believe it's the very last slide, so you can hold that down. There you go.
There we go.
I know it did that.
We closed 2 investments since the prior meeting. You have received closing materials related to both of these, but pursuant to our delegation policy, we include this as a slide in every meeting, so, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes, sir.
I have one. I guess it's the best place to do it, since I see real estate up there. What are you hearing or seeing about commercial real estate and defaults? And I hear, what is it, the one company's walking away?
You're prescient in your
Yeah.
question, because that is our first item.
Yeah.
And that is our,
Executive session?
that is our,
We're gonna talk about that later. Because I hear people are walking away from real estate.
We're gonna have-
Brookstone is walking away, is that their name?
Brookfield.
Brookfield walking
Blackstone.
away from real estate in big cities.
We're gonna have a
Lots
deep,
of people are.
we're gonna have a deep dive on that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's real estate.
And
Okay,
within
okay.
that specific too, some of our holdings, Bill.
All right, yep, defer. Thank you.
But not for very long.
Timely.
very timely.
Always done.
Oh, very timely question.
All right, folks, my watch is showing 10:21. I think at this point, next on the agenda is to recede into executive session. I'd also suggest that we, have a 5-minute, 10-minute comfort break. So do we want to recede into executive session and then break?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll call for a motion to recede into executive session, please.
So moved.
I have a motion, may I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to recede into executive session. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of receding into executive session, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. The motion carries. We receded to executive session. We'll now have a 10-minute comfort break, and I'd like for the staff to take appropriate measures now that we are in executive session.
Mr. Chairman, the reasons for going into executive session, just for the record, are stated on the agenda as posted.
Okay?
Yes.
This meeting is no longer being recorded.
How are you doing? Good. How's your drive?